This is the RAM 1500 RHO. I'm pretty sure everyone knows it already. After all, the TRX rewrote the book on full-size off-road performance trucks. But the RHO doesn't just follow in those tire tracks. It carves out a new trail of its own, bringing same aggressive styling, cutting-edge tech, and the all-new Hurricane twin turbo to a broader audience. I finally crossed 9,000 miles, so I'm way more familiar with the truck than I was when I first got it, and today I'm going to review it. The RHO shares its wide-body design with the TRX, giving it the same menacing stance and road presence. Honestly, looks were the main reason I bought it. 8-inch wider stance and the huge fenders, you can't miss that on the street. There's no denying it, this thing is a beauty. If you don't already own a TRX or an RHO, you might not even be able to tell them apart at first glance. The changes are subtle, but once you start looking closely, you realize the front end is completely new and doesn't actually share any parts with the TRX. The grille has a different shape and a different insert design. The front bumper is also unique and now finished entirely in black. The headlights keep the same overall shape, but the internal LED layout is totally different. Sometimes the RHO doesn't feel quite as intimidating or brutal as the TRX, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Compared to a standard RAM 1500, the RHO sits 8 inches wider and about 3 inches taller, thanks to the wide fender flares and off-road suspension. It comes standard with black 18-inch wheels, or you can option beadlock-capable wheels, both wrapped in 35-inch Goodyear Wrangler Territory all-terrain tires. Both the front and rear bumpers are metal and tied directly into the underbody skid plates. Unless you go with an all-black RHO, the truck always has a two-tone paint scheme, with the lower portion finished in black. And of course you get the dual exhaust tips integrated into the rear bumper. Up front you also get the same functional fender vents that you can actually see through. The hood vents are functional as well. The side vents help with cooling, while the center vent is actually part of the RAM air intake system. The rear fender vent, however, is the only fake one. Nope, actually, the hood vents are fake too. They look real, but are just decorative. There are no openings in the hood in these spots. One thing I'm a bit torn on is the amount of black plastic on the exterior. There might be a little too much of it, and at some point, I might color match or correct some of those pieces. Another detail I'm not a huge fan of is that all the door handles, including the tailgate handle, are color matched to the lower black portion of the truck instead of the main body color. The same goes for the side mirrors. Whether you get the regular mirrors or the tow mirrors, they're matched to the lower black section instead of the body color. The most important thing on this truck, at least in my opinion, is the suspension. This is really where the RHO separates itself not just from a regular RAM 1500, but from most full-size trucks in general. It's not a comfort-tuned suspension, and it's not just a lifted truck. It's a proper long-travel, performance-focused setup designed for speed, control, and stability when the terrain gets rough. The entire geometry is different compared to a standard RAM. The control arms are longer, the track is wider, and the suspension is built to allow significantly more wheel movement. All of this is what lets the truck sit so wide and still stay composed at speed. And of course, the centerpiece of the whole system is the Bilstein Blackhawk E2 adaptive shock system. The Blackhawk E2 shocks are electronically controlled, and they're constantly adjusting themselves in real time. Inside each shock, you've got electronically actuated valves that change the damping force on the fly, sometimes hundreds of times per second. The system is tied into multiple vehicle sensors. It's reading wheel speed, steering input, throttle position, braking, body movement, and drive modes, and then instantly adjusting how firm or soft each shock needs to be. That means the suspension behaves completely differently depending on whether you're cruising on the highway, hitting potholes in the city, cornering aggressively, or driving off-road at speed. I keep my settings in sport mode, which is way less bouncy and more suitable for driving on streets. Whether you ever take it off-road or not, this suspension completely changes how the RHO drives, and for me, it's easily one of the biggest reasons this truck feels special. Alright, let's jump to the most controversial part of this truck, the Hurricane engine. Under the hood, you've got a 3-liter twin-turbo inline-six, making 540 horsepower and 521 pound-feet of torque. Die-hard TRX guys absolutely hate this engine, and honestly, I get it. The TRX is a muscle truck, and when you think muscle, you think V8, sound, rumble, drama. Compared to that, the Hurricane can seem disappointing, at least on paper and especially in terms of sound. So reliability was a big question mark for me going into this. I wasn't sure how the Hurricane would hold up long term or whether it would feel right in a truck like this, but I have to say, this engine really surprised me. As you'd expect from an inline six, it's incredibly smooth and well balanced. So smooth, actually, that there have been times when I genuinely had to check if the truck was even on. I've left it running more than once because there's almost no vibration or sound at idle. This is miles away from the roughness and rumble of a V8. It really feels like a next-generation engine. Of course, it doesn't sound anything like a V8, but once you start pushing it into higher RPMs, you begin to hear something very familiar. There's a distinct BMW-style inline-6 sound, and honestly, I really like it. All of this makes the RHO an amazing daily driver. It's so smooth and effortless that you forget how big and heavy this truck actually is. Instead of feeling like a full-size pickup, it drives more like a large, sporty SUV. Fuel economy isn't anything groundbreaking, but it's definitely better than the TRX. I'll get into real numbers later. When you open the hood, one of the first things you'll notice is the RAM air intake system, which feeds air directly into the filter. This is actually a factory cold air intake, fully sealed from the engine bay once the hood is closed. One downside here, the air filter isn't reusable. After around 50,000 miles, the entire filter needs to be replaced. Now, without getting too deep into the engineering, here's the important stuff. The Hurricane is an aluminum 3-liter inline 6 with forged internal components and a twin turbo setup. Both turbos are integrated directly into the cylinder head. Both turbos are water-cooled, and that's actually a really important detail. There's no real worry about the turbos getting heat-soaked. With all this tech packed into it, the Hurricane honestly feels like it's not even breaking a sweat at factory power levels. And that shows. Some performance shops are already pushing these engines well beyond stock output, with builds reportedly hitting around 1,000 horsepower on stock internals. That tells you the engine hardware itself is extremely strong. That said, the engine might not be the weak point. Everything around it, especially electronics and software, could be where headaches come in. I'll talk more about that in the final chapter. Overall though, controversial engine choice or not, the Hurricane completely changes how the RHO drives. And once you live with it, it starts to make a lot of sense. Before I take it for a drive, let's see the interior, because honestly, I still think this is the nicest truck interior on the market. Even though the overall design hasn't really changed much since the TRX came out, it still holds up extremely well. When you sit inside, it doesn't really feel like you're in a truck. You get RHO badging in several spots throughout the interior, which is a nice touch and reminds you that this isn't just a regular Ram 1500. The seats are very comfortable, nicely bolstered, fully adjustable, and heated. The steering wheel is heated as well and comes with the usual controls, plus aluminum shift paddles that match the aluminum pedals. The pedals are electrically adjustable too, so getting the perfect driving position is easy. Unlike the regular 1500, you actually get a real shifter here, paired with a proper center console, which just feels right in a truck like this. Under the main unit, there's a wireless phone charger and a few USB ports. I do have to pause here for a second because the wireless charging might be an issue for some people. My iPhone 15 Pro Max would basically never charge there unless I flipped it upside down and fiddled with it for a while. So most of the time I ended up using a USB cable, but those ports don't support fast charging, so charging takes forever. The iPhone 17 Pro Max, on the other hand, works perfectly. Another thing I'm not a huge fan of is the plastic around this area. It feels very rubbery, scratches easily, and is honestly hard to keep clean. The same material is used for the cup holders, both in the center console and in the doors, and I really don't understand why they chose this finish. One thing I do appreciate though, you still get a proper door handle. No trendy button nonsense. Speaking of the center console, I can't forget this familiar badge you probably remember from the TRX. This time it features a RHO, along with some engine specs like horsepower and turbo info. It looks cool, but I have to say, here in Florida, that badge gets extremely hot and can literally burn your skin if you touch it after the truck's been sitting in the sun. The entire armrest is wrapped in suede, which looks great, but I'm a bit worried about long-term wear. The same suede material is used on the doors and seats as well. It feels premium now, but we'll see how it holds up over time. Under the armrest, you'll find a decent-sized storage compartment with a 115-volt outlet. At the bottom, there's a cool little detail, a blueprint graphic of previous RAM models, and then there's this surprisingly useful thing, built-in measurement guides. You can measure length, angle, convert wrench sizes from standard to metric, and yes, even the Pythagorean theorem is printed right there in case you forgot it. In the back, you get these floor storage pockets, which are actually pretty deep enough to hold most of the stuff you'd normally stuff under the seats. I found out that they actually stick out below the floor when I was installing the running boards. Unfortunately, the factory floor mats don't have cutouts, so they completely cover these storage bins, which is kind of annoying. Rear seat legroom is very good, although you shouldn't expect the same comfort as in an SUV. Back there, you'll also find more USB ports and another 115-volt outlet, which is always useful. As you might have noticed, I went with level 0, which means I get the 12-inch screen. Honestly, that's probably the only thing I slightly miss from level 1. On the plus side, instead of that ridiculous passenger screen, you get a second glove box, which I actually prefer. I also really appreciate that there are still a lot of physical buttons around the display. It would be a nightmare if all of these controls were buried inside the infotainment system. Which brings me to Uconnect. The screen itself is big and easy to navigate, but it seriously lacks polish and responsiveness. These systems first came out around 2019, and I bet the hardware hasn't changed much since. Sometimes it takes way too long just to switch between menus or cards, which gets frustrating fast. I do like the vertical layout though. A horizontal 12-inch screen would be much harder to reach. Wireless phone connectivity is another plus, but there's a big downside, the audio lag. When playing a video through CarPlay, the sound is almost a second behind the image. The unit got slightly better after recent updates, but if you're used to Tesla or BMW systems, this will feel outdated. That said, one of the coolest parts of Uconnect is the performance pages. You get access to a ton of data, timers, gauges, boost pressure, horsepower, G-forces, propulsion history, steering angles, and more. Quick look at the propulsion graph, which shows power delivery and history over the last 120 seconds. It's actually pretty cool to see how the truck behaves in real time. Inside the race options, you can also set up things like shift lights, launch control, and even something called race prep. Race prep is interesting. It basically redirects engine cooling to prioritize the intercooler, lowering intake temperatures and preparing the truck for maximum performance. It's not something most people will use every day, but it's another example of how much performance-focused tech is packed into this truck. You can also select drive modes here. There are preset modes, or you can fully customize them. Personally, I keep the transmission in street because sport kicks too hard and holds revs way too long. Stability stays in street as well. Suspension stays in sport because in street mode, the truck feels too bouncy. You can quickly switch modes using the selector under the cluster. And yes, truck also gets a fully digital instrument cluster, which I now totally love, but I hated it for the first few months. For about 3 months straight, it would restart every 2 minutes, which was extremely annoying. You can cycle through a ton of different layouts and information screens, even maps. Unfortunately, those maps only work with the built-in navigation. Google Maps through CarPlay won't display here, which is a bummer. Overall, the cluster is highly configurable and can show most of the information Uconnect does. I actually use this screen the most. It looks very utilitarian. I almost forgot to mention one very important thing, the selector. You get quick access buttons right here that let you jump straight into drive modes or directly into Uconnect settings without digging through menus. Every time you change a drive mode, the digital cluster plays a really nice animation. Now, this might surprise some people, especially if you're coming from Ford or other trucks. This truck cannot be driven in two-wheel drive mode. There's no rear-wheel drive only mode here. Instead, the RHO uses a full-time four-wheel drive system, and you've got several modes to choose from. And right next to all of that is probably one of the most used buttons in the entire truck, the Auto Start-Stop Disable. Auto Start-Stop function is just annoying, and this button gets pressed every single drive. There's also a launch control button. Let's take a quick look at how the truck feels at night. This is what the interior looked like in the dark, and I have to say, it's a bit different compared to some other brands. You won't find a ton of ambient LED strips all over the cabin. There's really just this subtle light above the glove box. The displays are bright, adjustable, and very easy to read. On the outside, the truck is actually surprisingly well lit. When you unlock it at night, it lights up the entire area around it. Now, driving a truck this wide does take a bit of getting used to. For the first few days, I kept catching myself looking at the rear fenders in the mirrors because they stick out so much. It just feels unusual at first, almost like you're driving something even bigger than it actually is. But after a while, you get used to it. Parking, though, is definitely more challenging, especially in tight parking garages. It's not just about finding a wide enough space, but also making sure the garage has enough height clearance, and I don't go to any garage that is under 7 feet. Even though the RHO weighs over 6,300 pounds, the little 3-liter Hurricane engine has more than enough power to move it without ever feeling strained. The transmission uses close gear ratios, so you never really feel like you're driving a big, heavy truck. Most of the time, it honestly feels more like a large, sporty SUV than a pickup. A huge part of that comes down to the suspension tuning. Unlike standard trucks that use leaf springs and a stiff rear axle, the RHO gets a performance-oriented suspension setup. Regular trucks tend to hop, bounce, or feel unsettled over bumps, especially mid-corner. The RHO just doesn't do that. When you put the shocks into sport mode, the truck stays incredibly composed. It doesn't bounce over uneven pavement, and it can actually handle surprisingly sharp turns for something this big, and its ability is limited by the off-road tires. The suspension feels very well thought out and extremely well tuned. There's a particular bump on one of my regular roads that gives normal cars trouble. In a regular vehicle, you hit it and the suspension goes straight to the limit, sometimes even unsettling the car or making it lose balance for a moment. In the RHO, it just smooths it out like an iron. That's what really surprised me. This truck isn't just a great off-roader, it's also an excellent daily driver. Here are a few shots from established YouTuber that really show what the suspension is capable of. I'll probably never find a road like that around here, but it clearly shows that the truck is way more capable than most drivers will ever push it. Okay, I think most of this sounded great, but this video is about the truck being best and also the worst. So let's get into the drawbacks and issues with owning the RHO. Let's start outside. I used to laugh at jokes about Tesla panel gaps. I even made a few myself, but honestly, RAM isn't that far off. Just look at this front fender and hood gap. Is the fender off? Is the hood off? I honestly don't know. A lot of owners report similar issues, uneven panel gaps, paint defects, or parts that aren't properly connected. And it really feels like it all depends on which shift assembled your truck at the factory. You might remember my very first RHO video. If you don't, I'll leave a link somewhere here. My truck broke after just 100 miles because someone at the factory forgot to properly connect the coupler on the transmission oil line. That's something that absolutely should not pass quality control. And this is one of the biggest reasons why the RHO can be the best or the worst truck you can buy. You might get a perfect, trouble-free one, or you might spend a lot of time at the dealership. Yes, the engine is smaller and more efficient than a supercharged V8, but don't expect miracles. The truck is still full-time four-wheel drive and weighs around 6,500 pounds, and that really shows when it comes to fuel economy. I was honestly disappointed when I realized I wouldn't be getting 15 mpg or more. For a long time, my average was around 11.6 mpg, and that's on premium 93 octane fuel, by the way. I drive about 70 to 80% highway, but that's actually what hurts the mileage the most. I like cruising at around 80 miles per hour, sometimes a bit more when following traffic. And at that speed, fuel consumption drops to about 11 mpg. At 75 miles per hour, it's closer to 13 mpg. At 65 miles per hour, you can get around 15 mpg. And driving slowly around the coast at about 30 miles per hour, I've seen 20 mpg. So yes, better mileage is possible. Even in normal street driving, the engine revs higher than I'm used to in passenger cars. The truck does 0-60 in about 4.5 seconds, so the gearing is clearly set up for performance, not efficiency. And let's be fair, this is an off-road performance truck. Highway cruising wasn't the main priority. Honestly, it would benefit a lot from a 10-speed transmission like Ford uses instead of the 8-speed. After the latest software update, fuel economy did improve a bit. Now I can average around 13 mpg, which is still low, but at least better than before. The fuel gauge is terrible. I can fill up the tank, drive 50-60 miles, and the range won't move at all. Then I'll drive another 20 miles, and suddenly it drops 100 miles. I'm not sure if it's because of the weird tank shape or poor calibration for the 33-gallon tank, but it's definitely not accurate. The ZF 8-speed transmission is mostly smooth, but not always. A lot of times when coming to a stop, you feel a noticeable kick. My old Challenger used to do the same thing, and I honestly thought this would be fixed by now. On top of that, the RHO seems to share a known drivetrain issue with the TRX, often referred to by owners as a drive shaft vibration or clunk issue. RAM never really figured out a permanent fix, so many TRX owners end up buying aftermarket drive shafts. That's pretty ridiculous on a truck in this price range. Another thing you might notice, there's no engine oil dipstick. That means you can't manually check oil level the traditional way. It's convenient when it works, but when it doesn't, you're basically blind. After around 10,000 miles, I've already noticed an oil leak from the bottom of the intercooler, most likely caused by the PCV system. My next purchase will probably be an oil catch can. These trucks cost 70 to 90 grand and even more for tungsten or the old TRX. So why do they use infotainment hardware that feels slower than cars costing 1/3 of the price? I have the 12-inch screen, but the 14-inch units behave the same way. Switching menus is painfully slow. It feels like a low-budget tablet from a decade ago. You can literally see the lag when switching menus or scrolling maps. Google Maps stutters, animations lag. It's just not acceptable. Recent updates helped slightly, but overall it's still bad. The truck uses 2 batteries, and battery-related issues are surprisingly common. Weak batteries can cause all sorts of weird behavior, especially software glitches. It's probably the most common issue with RHO. Many owners are on second or third set of batteries. Mine were replaced already as well to fix the idle RPM fluctuation issue. It didn't help. My truck has a brake pedal noise, and despite multiple dealership visits and paperwork saying it was fixed, it still isn't. Another small but annoying thing, the outside temperature gauge. It's usually about 9 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the actual temperature. This is the first vehicle I've owned with such an inaccurate reading. This one drives me crazy. When you press the windshield washer, the wipers start moving before the washer fluid sprays. That makes absolutely no sense. If your windshield is dirty, the wipers just smear everything around. Not to mention they're running dry, which damages the blades. This really should be a simple software fix, and I hope RAM addresses it one day. Right after I got the truck, I noticed how narrow the rear camera view is. In most cars I've owned, the camera is wide enough that you can see oncoming traffic before backing out of a parking spot. Not here. As you can see on the screen, you can't even see the corners of the bumper. The truck does warn you about cross traffic with beeping, but a wider camera view would be much better. And that brings me to the rear view mirror, which is just too small. It doesn't even cover the full rear window. In a regular car, you can see all mirrors within your field of view. In a truck, the side mirrors are far back, so you actually have to turn your head. A larger center mirror would really help here. One of the reasons I was excited about the digital cluster was the ability to display navigation behind the steering wheel. but the cluster can only show RAM's native maps. I exclusively use Apple CarPlay, mainly because I use calendar-based navigation and real-time traffic. CarPlay maps cannot be displayed in the cluster, which makes the feature much less useful. This one is surprisingly annoying. Almost every car I've owned had automatic door locking when you start driving. I never even thought about it. The RHO doesn't have it, and there's no option to enable it. It has plenty of other lock-related features like unlocking when you approach the truck, but somehow misses this basic one. And finally, software. My biggest issue was the digital cluster restarting every 2 minutes for months. The truck also has a weird behavior where RPMs fluctuate while idling for long periods, which seems tied to cooling and software logic. On top of that, cluster data doesn't always match Uconnect data, and some owners report updates that actually make things worse. I've had issues with the remote since day one. Dealer tried to update the software, and yet it still doesn't work properly. I basically have to be right next to the truck to be able to open it or lock it. This applies to the door locks too, as well as starting the truck. I have key in my pocket, and unless I put it into center console, it won't recognize it. You might think, it's under warranty, who cares? Just drop it off and get a loaner, right? Not exactly. In my experience, parts are constantly on back order, anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 months. Dealerships won't give you a loaner until they actually start working on the truck, so you often have to rent a car and get reimbursed later. That's happened to me twice. My truck spent 24 days in the shop, and I still haven't been compensated. To get anything done, you have to open a case with FCA LLC, escalate through multiple managers, and constantly follow up. There's zero proactivity from their side. So here's the truth. The RHO is an incredible truck, but it's not a flawless one. It drives better than almost anything in this category, looks insanely good, and feels special every time I get behind the wheel. It feels like something way more refined and way more capable. But at the same time, it comes with issues that just shouldn't exist on a truck at this level. Some things just shouldn't be happening at this price point, from quality control to a dealer service experience. And that's what makes it so confusing, because depending on your experience, this can either be the coolest truck you've ever owned or a huge headache. And from what I've learned online, it's mostly the first option. Yes, it has a lot of issues that are slowly solved, but every single time I drive it, those negatives just disappear. And that's exactly why the RHO is both the best and the worst truck you can buy. And honestly, I'd still buy it again. Before you go, hit that subscribe button and smash that like button if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to check out my other videos. Thanks for watching.